Me to go.
Hey guys, welcome to summer skills sessions. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can get started. All right, thank you guys for coming today. First, a little announcement, if my screen will change. Just a quick reminder that we do not have a social this weekend. However, next weekend, next Saturday on the 8th, we will have another industry edition. So we'll actually be sending out more information about like inviting industry professionals if you have anyone that you want to invite and chat with. And it's just a cool time to come chat and pretty informal. So all of the industry professionals they have before have been like very chill and good to talk to during these. And today we have our skill session on graphic design taught by Jake. So I will go ahead and pass it over to him and stop screen sharing.
All right, thank you, Kate. Oh, I can't screen share.
I think you should be able to now. I just changed it.
You guys see that all right?
Yes.
There we go. All right, good evening, everyone. Thanks, Caitlin and Jake, for the invitation to sit down with you guys tonight. As they said, my name is Jake Geitner, and I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about graphics tonight. And here on this opening slide, you'll notice this imagery here is from the New York Times, and I'm going to be pulling a few examples from them. Really, if you want a masterclass on graphics, take up your school's free subscription from the New York Times and scroll through it every now and then. So you may be wondering what I know about graphics, or specifically, what can I teach you about graphics? To answer those questions, I thought I'd tell you a little bit about myself to begin with. So I'm from Syracuse, New York. This fall, more or less, I'll be entering my junior year at Cornell, and I'm double majoring in landscape architecture and film. In my spare time, I serve as the president of Cornell ASLA and the co-president of Cornell TPEG. I may have even competed alongside some of you at the Ryerson International Serial Design Competition at Universal Studios. And then currently out in Denver, I'm calling in from Denver tonight on Mountain Time, where I'm completing an internship with a landscape architecture firm called MVVA. So these next few slides, I included some of my own past works, not particularly to show them off or to even proclaim that I know that all there is to know about graphics, but instead to kind of demonstrate the importance of developing a graphic style, an individualized graphic style for that matter, because you can find many similarities between these different drawings of mine in their choice of color, line weight, mood, or even overall representation. Even more so, you can kind of see that I lean towards a particular drawing type and a particular composition. One that kind of pans along these eyes is either sectional or very sectional in its perspectival elements. And this is really crucial because as you start to represent your own ideas, you're forced to make choices about your style and what style best suits your voice and the idea at hand. So to begin, you may be even wondering, what do we mean by graphics? In today's very digital world, graphics kind of envelope a very wide range of disciplines and drawings. Anybody can be graphic, and I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of kind of Googling the term so that we can kind of break down the various definitions from a more didactic perspective. So by graphics, we can mean designs and illustrations, we can mean diagrams, visual images of any kind, and then even in another sense, the quality of being graphic, or as we're probably all familiar, explicit in detail. We all know that kind of graphic type in which the pixels are blurred out so we can't see that explicit item. So now that you kind of have a loose understanding of graphics, you may also wonder where we can identify graphics in themed entertainment. So moving from left to right, we can look at a whole wide range of graphic types. At the far left, we have what I kind of believe is graphics in their most pure form, the concept sketch. And then as we move over, we can see more refined graphic examples like a logo, which in themed entertainment is crucial to kind of developing a brand, something that people will cling on to. Then more so, you have a polished photorealistic rendering, which we oftentimes see when a new concept is first introduced, because those are really the money drawings right there, especially more so in our society. Those are really starting to sell hard. And then lastly, but not exclusively, we have signage, particularly from how Universal is dealing with COVID. And this is an ever-present feature of the themed entertainment experience. Signage is very crucial and it's very graphic, and they're oftentimes making very clear and intentional choices. So diving into my personal archive of graphic collections, you would find a lot of drawings that are very similar to this conceptual and very sketchy style shown here. This is one of Harbor Goff's original Jungle Cruise drawings. And so even today, when we look at a lot of themed entertainment precedents, these graphics owe a great deal to this style, and it taking roots in kind of the animation of the early 20th century and that sort of hand drawing. So as a hand drawing, this image is very effective in conveying the design's overall feel and sense of place. And you could compare this to even those photorealistic renderings. They do a lot in what they're trying to convey, except this does it in a much more heavy-handed fashion. Then we have graphic examples such as these, which are often more diagrammatical and focused on actualizing the graphic at hand or getting it built. This isn't a pure construction detail by any means. You can't look at this and figure out how to erect those audio animatronic elephants, but you can tell a lot about their motion, you can tell a lot about their presence, and I'm sure if you put a ruler to this, you could tell something about their dimensions. And then in a more modern style, we can find graphics such as these. They're often adapted to logos, digital displays, or even merchandise. And then you may see this next graphic, and at first you might not even think of it as graphic, but instead of as photographic. And many graphic artists today are absorbing this photorealistic approach. Because when you share your ideas with a broad public audience, as these images are often released to, typically they're an audience that lacks graphic or a design background. And you want them immediately to kind of develop a feeling for the image and cling to that idea. And then in themed entertainment, you can see how graphics take on an even larger role. So our industry makes money off of telling a story. And to do so completely, objects even as simple as churro stands, they must utilize graphics to contribute to the broader theme. And then logos are another invaluable feature of the industry. At this point, the Disney logo is an irreplaceable visual of American culture. And of course, that has consequences for logos even as recent as the Hollywood Studios logo on the left. That's going to face some pretty severe feedback and backlash when they make changes to it like this, which maybe, hopefully by the end of the presentation, you'll be able to tell why the logo on the right is a far worse example of graphic design than the logo on the left. And then on the other hand, logo development can be crucial. Revisiting old graphics is very important, even to appeal to an ever-changing audience. Universal Studios did a much better job in this transition. So what and how do these graphics communicate? You may be able to identify a graphic type, but for it to actually contribute to your own style and for you to learn anything from it, you need to be able to kind of identify the graphic choices at hand. So here we have John Hench's concept art for Space Mountain in Tomorrowland. And this is one of my personal favorites. And this piece makes a wide range of heavy graphic choices. And we're going to use it to kind of dive in and break down a few of those. So I took the time and I organized some of them for you on the right-hand side. And we'll go through them one by one. And we'll just do this for a couple of images so you kind of get a feel for this. At first, we have the color choice. He elects for a very warm color palette. And that immediately evokes a feeling inside of you. It's a warm feeling. Warm colors equal warm feelings. And it's also subverting any kind of preconceptions that you may have to this type of place. You may think he would have opted for a cooler palette, a more futuristic one, one with light grays and blues. But instead he's going with this warm, saying this is a unique place. Also in its contrast, you see a lot of heavy contrast, even compositionally, between the darker reds here, and it kind of fades off into this yellow. So that draws your eyes up the image. This image lacks annotations, but it's a sketch, and it's concept art at its heart. So by putting annotations on a graphic, you're putting more clear intent, and you're making things almost irreplaceable. They're a lot more concrete when you annotate something. So something as fluid and early on as this, you're likely not going to annotate. Line weight. If you look down in the lower right hand of the image, you see a very clear line weight. You can look there and you can tell the difference between a watercolor and a pen. that black line right there. And as it starts to fade up the window panes here, that line weight completely disappears. And in doing that, he's making a very graphic choice. He's telling you that that window is something that can be seen through. If any of you are near a window right now, look out it and try to really focus on what's in the background. Try to focus out what's through the window. Those window panes, those lines along the window, they're going to fade out of your vision and out of your foreground in the same way that he draws here. Composition, it's a very, what we call triangular composition, in that it develops a clear structure here, and that's entirely formed by the Space Mountain point. So that composition draws your eye through the image, and it also tells you that there's something more important in the background. He's exaggerating the scale of Space Mountain there, kind of give a feel for it. And by using all of these different figures and kind of giving them personalities of their own, he's telling you something very clear about the space's use. So then we'll look at another graphic, and this is more traditionally a graphic design, and you can even dive into the history of these Disney World signs a little bit, and you'll know that they're commissioned by an LA graphic design firm when they were first building the property. And you'll look at these and you'll say, well, that's not a typical road sign. When you think of road sign, you'll probably think of that interstate sign. White numbers on a blue background with some red trim here and there. And that completely subverts that conception. So in doing so, they have to make a lot of very intentional graphic choices to retain the qualities of a typical road sign. So by doing that, let's look at the color first. And maybe some of you know a little bit about the history of these signs and the color choices. They're unusual, but we look at this red, we look at this yellow and that black, and that's gonna remind you of a very popular Disney character. So that's Mickey Mouse's color scheme there. But then the purple and the teal, those are the ones that really throw you off. It's like, where did they get those? Well, if you look at the complementary colors, you look across the color wheel from red and yellow, you'll find purple and teal. So those colors are meant to complement the red and the yellow. And then our annotations are very clear. That's a very obvious font choice. It's simple. We'll learn a little bit about the type of lettering that is, but that's a serif font, meaning that it has no feet to it, unlike a Times New Roman. And it develops a very clear contrast between its background. And the composition is even so in that you read the lettering before you get to the sign and before you kind of get to the background. So you go Disney Springs, Casting Center, Typhoon Lagoon theme parks, then you can see straight ahead, and then your eye is drawn to the arrow. It's also very obvious in its usage, and its simplicity and legibility is entirely developed by the color palette and the contrast that it's developing between its annotations and the background which the font's laid on. So now I'm kind of gonna pivot completely, and we're gonna go from this themed entertainment focused kind of case study into, we're gonna dive into some different drawing types. And kind of like I said at the beginning of the presentation, everybody has a favorite drawing type, and in doing so, you're making clear graphic choices about the idea at hand and about kind of the ideas that you have personally. So first we'll dive into the plan. And the plan is known for its schematic components. It's completely measurable. It oftentimes has keys. And in this example of the plan, it's not photorealistic at all. It's not a Google Earth image. It's not rendered with the normal kind of colors, but instead it's very simple. It uses the obvious choices for water, and then it develops a clear contrast between the black and the white so that you get a figure ground relationship with the buildings. And it's also making very clear, very simple annotations so that you can kind of break it apart piece by piece. This graphic scale at the bottom allows you to measure every aspect of this plan. And then here's a little bit more of an abstract example of a plan. It kind of shows you how flexible each drawing type really can be. This was developed by a Yale professor named Robert Venturi when he took his architecture studio to Las Vegas. And it was this kind of like groundbreaking study of the parking lots in Las Vegas. And it totally transformed American design and the design of the themed entertainment industry for that matter. So if you don't know Robert Venturi, or if you're not familiar with his Yale studio, I highly recommend looking into it. Las Vegas is truly the theme park of America. But this black and white relationship here, the contrast, that's called figure ground. And so you see what they want you to see, and you see that only. And the rest, you can kind of make up whatever you want. I don't know, you may have seen similar images where they show you two like intersecting kind of white and black figures, and you look at it one way and it's a vase, and you look at it another way, it's two faces. So that's what we call figure ground, and it's a very useful graphic tool. And then we have something here as annotated and maybe as illegible as the New York City subway map. This is a plan through and through, and how it's rendered. You can measure these subway lines and tell you, with the right calculations, you can tell you how long it would take you to get from this point on the blue line to that point on the green line. But it retains kind of those plan components, all while telling you everything you need to know about the New York City subway. So next we'll get into the section, and I kind of gave a brief prelude on that at the beginning, because that's the drawing type that I tend to gravitate towards most. And the section's unique in that it's measurable, but it's also not a typical view. To explain a section, think of if you cut a piece of broccoli straight down the middle, and you would be drawing exactly what that face of that broccoli was, and you'd see inside the broccoli, but you'd also see the broccoli's relationship with the space outside of it. This is maybe a very kind of construction focus. This is a very engineered example of the section, and that it's well annotated, it's clear in its line work, it's consistent in its line work, as the line weight you see for this rock here is the exact same as you see for this here. But you could build Cinderella Castle with this drawing. Would I recommend trying to pitch the concept of Cinderella Castle with this drawing? No, because you look at that and your normal average audience is going to see this graphic and they're going to find it incredibly boring. This, on the other hand, is a place that you would like to be. The colors that it uses, the variety of textures that it uses to convey the plant material, the feel of the wall, the way the figures are positioned in the space, that tells you a great deal about this section. And then here, this is a masterclass on section as well, because sections are crucial in their line weight. This line weight right here where my mouse is telling you a lot different than the line weight here. With a section, you want a very clear base line weight, because that's your cut. And that's really all that matters. That's what you're showing. And I could follow this black line basically all the way through the drawing. And anytime we're cutting through something up here, this line weight at the ground plane, it lifts. And it tells you that we're cutting through something here. And you see the glass. The glass is very different than the line weight we're using for the cut. So this drawing, this is one of my favorite drawings of all time. It tells you, you could look at this for hours and hours and learn everything you need to know about section. The perspective, which is one that we tend to opt for more often in themed entertainment, because we're all about conveying mood and the sense of place and selling our ideas. So here's kind of, this is a Photoshop rendering. This is an entirely imagined landscape. It's pulling from real images. All of these flowers at one point were their own little PNG with a transparent background so that they could just be slapped on top of this base. But it's taking all of these different kind of graphic features and assembling them with Photoshop to create one very compelling rendering. And at the end of the presentation, I'm actually going to take you under the hood of one of my Photoshop renderings, so you can kind of get a sense of how you can use software like that to develop kind of very individualized graphics and focused graphics. And then here we have a perspective that really, I mean, this perspective does a lot. It's quite far away from Walt Disney Imagineering's original kind of style, but it is still a place that the large majority of a public audience would want to go to. And then most recently, this is entirely a perspective. I can tell you this was probably done in Photoshop. See these kind of like very subtle brush strokes there that make this feel like a painting? That's a Photoshop effect, and they totally took that from Photoshop. So it's not that complex. With a little practice, anybody could make this. So then we have the axon in the isometric drawings. These are unique in their hybrid nature. So it's both a section, a plan, and a perspective. It's a combination of all three drawing types that we just talked about. But this is kind of a more advanced and a little bit more of a design drawing tool. So I'm going to kind of skip through this one, but here you can see if you follow the line on the side, that's where your section is. You get the plan from the relationship between the different features of the site, and then you get the perspective because it tells you something about the material. It tells you about where the people can inhabit the space, and it does still give you texture. Here's another example of an axon that does a lot of those things well. And similar to the plan that I showed early on, it utilizes kind of this graphic, very grid-like feature to make it measurable. Axons aren't perfectly measurable, but you can still measure an axon. And then another, and you can see the use of annotations here are crucial. This tells you everything you need to know about this drawing. And then the diagrams. Most of us, for a large majority of us, when conveying our ideas, a diagram is most useful. And I guess for a large majority of those entering the themed entertainment industry, your graphic use may never get any further than the diagram. So this is taken from this book by a graphic designer named Nigel Holmes. It's a nice little coffee table book, and it basically gives you a step-by-step on very simple, basic, everyday tasks, but it does so in a graphically consistent manner, in a graphically clear manner. You can tell, you could look at this and you could fold a shirt better than I ever have in my entire life. And then using diagrams as a design tool, this is actually from a project that I did a pretty intense case study on this past fall. And what's unique about this project is if you look at this one, these are all pavers. So a paver is like basically a brick that you use at a site. And each unit, the entire ground plane at this site, the whole ground is formed by this one unit. And so in assembling this, their concept was if you take this one unit and you make it so that it's rotatable and that it can kind of rise and fall in different directions, that's all you need to build this place. So obviously in their diagramming, they had to be very clear, not only to kind of commit to the design, but also to make sure that it got built exactly how they wanted it. So you can be sure that these diagrams were delivered to the contractors when they were building the site so that they could look at them and refer to them so they get that rotation right, they maintain those points of tangency, they know what to do at all these weird instances. But nonetheless, these are construction tools, but they're also very, very graphic in their representation. And then you can look at this. This is maybe when you start to get into a kind of like a more design focused standpoint, diagramming really becomes a tool. And these are all different iterations of the same project, diagrammed with very simple moves. So when you're diagramming something, you want to be very simple. So just using an up arrow to make a design move. And that's what all of these diagrams are doing. They're just they're lifting, they're dropping, they're cutting, they're filling to kind of develop the site. And then infographics and visual journalism. I talked about this a little bit, the first slide of the presentation, in that you can look at the New York Times and you can learn everything you need to know about graphics. For instance, this is taking just simple paragraphs, simple body text, and kind of integrating them into the story that the article is telling. You can find this very easily in sports journalism. I'm a huge Boston Red Sox fan, and the Boston Globe does some great graphics about the Red Sox and their different stats, because stats are a very graphic kind of form of information. And you can mold stats into something like this. He's hit 270 home runs to right field. Well, those 270 home runs should look a lot bigger, and they should be a lot more boldly represented than those 38 that he's hit to left field. The same with Pedro Martinez's circle change. You know, his 219 wins, they should tell you a lot more about his career than those 100 losses. And they do, because the wins, they tell you who he won against. They're in a stronger color. They take up more of the image. They totally align with his figure. And then this is using annotations and text to form the graphic entirely. I mean, you basically have the entire body of the United States formed out of all of these different property values. Quite amazing what the New York Times manages to do with visual journalism. And then most recently, I'm sure a lot of you probably saw this, but this is extremely graphic and it's extremely impactful. in its messaging. So now that you kind of have maybe all of these different drawing types and these kind of graphic tools in your repertoire, you may be wondering how you can improve your own graphic choices. My biggest one, font choice. Font choice matters, and it matters huge. When you're developing a presentation, think about font entirely. I've been using a font, I downloaded it from the internet. Go download your own fonts. Spend time, find a font that speaks to you and that's very clear. There's a reason why your iPhone is in Helvetica. It's because Helvetica is extremely simple and it's extremely easy to read. Apple basically branded themselves off of Helvetica. But I use Active Grotesque throughout this entire presentation. And you can't look at Active Grotesque in the Y and tell me that it's the same as Comic Sans in the Matter. It's just not. Font is mood, font is story, font is legibility. It carries everything. So be careful in your font choice. And read about it. There are so many resources online that tell you what font choice is better. There are books, there are monographs that you can just find about font. And it'll tell you everything you need to know about being a graphic designer. And then what I mentioned earlier, sans serif versus serif. Serif is our Times New Roman. Everybody wrote their high school essays in Times New Roman. We all had to use serif font at one point. And I'm sure as soon as we all got to college, we started using a sans serif font in our papers because serif is super boring and it's hard to write in sometimes. But serif has a feat. It's often used for body text because it's easy to read. That's why we all wrote in it. That's why Times New Roman is so common. But sans serif is typically kind of much more individualized. You can tell a lot about a person more so by a sans serif font than you can by a serif because all the serif looks the same and the sans serif are very unique. Font size. So here I've taken a New York Times article and I've underlined 3 different sizes that they use on the page. When you're doing any kind of graphic, whether it's just a PowerPoint or it's a logo, never, never, never have more than 3 different font sizes. This builds a hierarchy. It tells your eyes where to go in a very easy manner. You go title, you go author, and then you go body text. To jump on that point even more, never use more than 3 different fonts per graphic. If you have a PowerPoint and it has 3 different font types and then it also has 3 different font sizes, that's going to be extremely illegible. So colors, back to that Walt Disney World, the road signs. And we talked about complementary colors a little bit. So here's that complementary color wheel. So say you want to pick your own colors for a graphic and you say, oh, I want to start with ruby, but you need something that's kind of going to look good with that ruby. All you have to do is go across the color wheel. The color wheel makes it extremely easy if you're not sure what color palette to pick for yourself. And you can also go to websites like this. I just took a screenshot off the internet here. This is, it's called Coolers, or however you want to pronounce that. But anyway, just go to a color palette generator. That's all you have to type into Google Earth. You pick one color and it'll give you a whole range of colors here that you can also use in your presentations. And what's great about kind of the color system that we've developed in this country is that they are all coded. So all you have to do is go into PowerPoint and type in this color code here, and it's going to give you the exact same color. And if you want to go back to the presentation and figure out how to do that, just come here. And you can develop your very own color palette in PowerPoint, which is something that a lot of people don't take the time to do. But if there's one thing I can stress about graphics is that they take time. When you're painting a picture, you don't do it in 5 minutes. You spend hours and hours upon each blade of grass, and then it really looks like a fantastic thing. So composition, when you're developing a PowerPoint or any kind of graphic, you need lines, you need guidelines, you need to follow those same lines so that there's a graphic unity to your presentation. This is from a studio that one of my professors taught, in which he made them kind of pick out their favorite magazine, sort through that, and then transfer it all to this kind of like very AutoCAD line work type of deal, in which it's basically giving you a guide of how to make that magazine. And the magazine follows all of these formats. Here you have your page on the left and your page on the right. And it's going image, image, text, your captions, and then your primary image. And as long as you follow these same kind of schemes throughout your entire PowerPoint, your entire presentation, people are going to know what to look at. guides are a crucial tool when you're developing a composition and when you're trying to make things look cohesive. So here's another little tutorial from the internet on how you can go in PowerPoint and how you can set up these guidelines. If you're not sure what I mean by guidelines, here we are here. And so everything that falls along this blue line, that's all titles. And then you have your space for your images, and it kind of just hits. You see how all of these body texts are hitting the exact same line throughout the entire book. So if this is a book, every page of this book here, and you can see how similar each page is in its composition. You see the way it uses images here, you can see the body text, and then of course all of the pictures. You get a closer view of that here, and then you turn on the guides and you see, going back and forth here, you can see how that starts to make sense and how that starts to contribute to a very effective graphic. And then zooming in, I mean, lines are crucial in developing a PowerPoint, and bad PowerPoints, you can immediately tell because the text is all over the place and you're looking for a title in a different spot every time. That's not what you want to do. So elevate your graphics even further. Creative Cloud is where graphic designers use Adobe Creative Cloud. And that's a suite that includes Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign. And I'm going to take a little time to kind of give you a very brief and basic intro tutorial to these different softwares, because if you want to be a graphic designer, you're going to have to use these at some point. So Illustrator, what I can tell you about Illustrator is that Illustrator is in vector. So vector images, hold on one second. Sorry about that. I'm in the office and someone just came back to work. But this, so we'll start over on Illustrator. So we look at this vector image on the right. And what's unique about this is that you can take that vector image and you can blow it up to any scale that you want. And it'll retain its quality all the way. Whereas a raster image, which we can think of as a photograph, it has pixels. Each individual square has a particular color value, and when all of those are squished together, that's when you get the image. So a raster image, you blow that up, it's going to start to lose quality pretty fast. And that's why when you export things, you always choose for the highest pixel ratio. InDesign. InDesign is basically like the PowerPoint of the graphic design world. I made this presentation in InDesign. Most books, most newspapers, yearbooks are often formatted in InDesign. And InDesign is great because it has a lot of tools that allows you to maintain graphic consistency. And they also allow you to link up different images from the rest of the Creative Cloud, such as Illustrator and Photoshop. So now we go into Photoshop, and here's where I'm going to kind of break off from the presentation and dive under the hood of one of my own. But before we do that, I'll just give you a basic idea of what Photoshop can do. So we're taking the same image of the forest, we're running it through various lighting, giving it a texture, then we're bringing in these different leaves, and pretty soon you have a forest. And then you add in different components, you give it a path, you change that path's color, you add a couple people, and all of a sudden this is a place, this is a design. You can actually sell this. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and reshare. So I'm going to share this Photoshop file with you. You can all see that, yep. And so just to illustrate what Photoshop can really do, so we take this Photoshop file begins with this one picture of the sunset. And I've taken the eraser tool and kind of just trimmed it down so that I have the sun exactly where I want it. And then that transitions to this image of the sky. But that image of the sky is too bright, it doesn't work, so that doesn't stay. And then suddenly the trees start to come in, and I use a different hue and saturation filter to make those trees a little bit more like it. And then this image of the hotel comes in, and this is entirely clipped from a larger image. And with Photoshop, you have the tools to take this picture, which was once, I'll show it to you without the clipping mask. This image of the hotel, which was once that picture, with the proper Photoshop tools, you can change that to exactly what you want it. So now that's just the hotel. And then I'm bringing in images of the water. So at one point, this water, it was just one. And then slowly, by changing the hue and saturation, by messing with the transparency of different ones, you can morph that into you just created a lake just with a few filters and a couple edits. And then using some more advanced Photoshop tools to kind of create these ripples in the water, so that when I place my my car down, which is, I seem to lost. So when I place the car in the water, it's actually creating ripples. And this is a real scene. I'm doing that with all these different elements of a photographic image that you would normally find appealing, such as the car window reflection, something as simple as that, reflecting this man's body through the window so that it really looks like he's behind the wheel of this car. Or taking the people and kind of messing with their colors, their hue and saturation, so that they all look like they were photographed in the same place. They all should have the same lighting to them. And then adding in these rocks in the background, and then all of a sudden I have a jetty and a place for my lighthouse to land. And this sky should be, there we go, there's the sky. So at this point, I have a pretty believable place. I've added in some boats there for the harbor. But then I'm gonna take this image and I'm gonna export it out of Photoshop. So here I have it now. And after running it through a couple of Photoshop filters, we lift the hue and saturation on it. We mess with some of the levels so that it's more exposed and that it's brighter. And then you add a threshold so that each texture is more defined. This threshold, you can identify it here. Zoom a little bit. The threshold, it creates this kind of black line that really defines, it gives it a little bit more depth and three-dimensional qualities. And then taking that polished image, doing this all again, adding all of those filters again, messing with the edges a little bit, bringing in a font that I developed myself in Illustrator. You can go on YouTube and you can look up how to create a postcard font. In about 15 minutes, it'll walk you through an Illustrator tutorial where you can make anything you want to say in that classic postcard font. And then bringing in this banner, which similar to some of the other items in the rendering, I just took from a larger image and then clipped down. Adding my own text to that, finding a font that kind of aligns with that postcard font and complements the cursive there. Then adding another layer on top of that so that it reads a little bit brighter and it seems like it truly belongs in the image. Throwing a gray filter over that and then adding a texture, and then all of a sudden it's a postcard. I'm sure that seemed like a lot, but this was all done in a matter of 2 days with just a few YouTube videos. I mean, I didn't know how to do any of these filters. I didn't really know how to make a proper clipping mask until I watched a YouTube video. And a graphic designer really can kind of make their mark with just tools like that. So I'll go back to the PowerPoint just for one quick second. There we go. And that's about all I have for you today. Thanks for listening, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thanks a lot.
If anyone has a question, yeah, thank you, Jake. If anyone has a question, feel free to unmute yourself, or if you have like audio troubles or don't want to talk, feel free to put it in the chat and we will check it out.
One question I have is, I know you mentioned like going to YouTube. Do you have any like, I don't know, like favorite videos or like resources, websites that are kind of like a go-to for these kinds of questions?
Honestly, so typically when I'm developing it, when I'm putting in a YouTube search for this kind of stuff, I go, there's a very particular way that you'll probably most likely find success with your search, and that I always go with the app. So if it's a Photoshop tutorial I'll go Photoshop, and then you really have to explore a little bit because to find the proper video, you got to know what you're talking about. And sometimes you can't find what you want to do because you don't know what it is that you want to do. So first, I would type in, like, for that postcard, I typed in Photoshop postcard font. Let's just see what we find here. Pretty quickly, you'll find this video from Spoon Graphics. If you're experimenting with Creative Cloud, Adobe, they have a lot of great tutorials that come free with the app. You kind of have to even guide through them when you open their apps. But stuff like this, Adobe is great for that. They tell you everything you really need to know. And I would encourage all of you to look into your school's kind of stance with Creative Cloud, because many times they'll offer a free subscription. You can get that downloaded. And if not, there's like a 90-day free trial. And if you find that you like it and that you're really using it for your graphic tools, then I would spend the money and get it, because there are some pretty inexpensive student licenses.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, you got it.
So, still open for questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, first things first, I heard my name mentioned a couple of times while you were demonstrating. What was up with that?
Well, what's your name? I'm not
Hugh.
seeing that. Hugh. Oh, I see.
Okay, that wasn't the real question though. So
Yeah, you and your buddy Saturation.
okay, all right. So aside from Adobe, what are your thoughts on like other competing art programs for graphic design? Because what I personally own, like right now, is a license for Clip Studio Paint. I mean, it's more designed for drawing, sketching, painting, graphic novel art, right, and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, by no means I would say is Creative Cloud the only source for graphic design. It is great because it's very interchangeable between the various apps, in that it's kind of just an industry standard. It's the same with like using AutoCAD for drafting. There's really just some parts of that you can't avoid. And if you're a graphic designer, you're going to be using Creative Cloud. But by no means this is the only option. I'm not familiar with the program that you mentioned, but I'm sure it can do very similar things by what you said. You know.
Yeah, it's designed for graphic novels like manga and comic books. So, but
Yeah, it sounds like a much more specialized tool. Whereas, like if you were using Creative Cloud, you probably have to take specific illustrations and move them from Illustrator into InDesign to form the layout. But with apps like those that you're mentioning, it oftentimes is much more centralized.
Real quick, we have a question from the chat. So Josiah asked, what are some exercises you can do to find your own style?
Sketch constantly. Buy a sketchbook and just draw everything you see. You'll start to kind of get a feel for the shapes. Everybody has a shape that they like to draw. Mine's like this very like triangular type of palm tree kind of image, and everybody has a kind of like a line weight that they'll choose. Some people naturally kind of draw in a more architectural style with a very precise and light line weight, and others have a more clumsy, by no means any less. But yeah, I would just draw and watch those tutorials constantly. Just for fun. Next time you're gonna watch Netflix, watch a Photoshop tutorial instead. You'll be amazed by some of the things that they can do.
I do have a question. I use all the programs that you described, and you did a really great job describing them. I find that when I do my graphic designs, mostly what I do is I do interiors for them, or I do floor plans, and I render floor plans all day long because I'm an interior designer.
Nice.
I find that a lot of times the companies that I work for want me to work in smart objects. I use them. I understand how to use them. I don't really understand why, but I feel like it always makes my files huge.
Yes.
Is that something you know anything about?
hold on. I'll actually pull up that Photoshop file again because you might have noticed that some of these are smart objects. I was in the same boat. I didn't understand why on earth you would use a smart object. It just makes the file super laggy.
Yeah.
But the great thing about a smart object is that I could take this lighthouse, which as soon as I put it in, I convert it to a smart object.
Yeah.
And I can blow it up to the scale that it was at when I first brought it in, and it doesn't lose any resolution.
Right.
So it retains all of that pixel information so that no matter how big or small you make it, it has the same kind of quality.
Yeah, I find it comes in handy when I want to like change out, like, okay, they picked this flooring and then all of a sudden they want this flooring, but I've already spent like hours doing the shadowing and the texturing and all that kind of stuff. So
Yes,
like, I
too.
just have that one file and I can just switch out, you know, the smart object and just go and change that. I don't have to change any of the other stuff. So like if I'm doing it like a tie, like I can have the tie all set up, and then if I want to just change out the imagery on it, like I can change out the imagery on it. I just find it like, it just, I don't know if it's just me, but like my files are ridiculously small. So I've had to get like higher and higher quality computers to compensate for the fact that I have so many smart objects. So
Yeah, I mean, it can be unavoidable, but
yeah.
For instance, like I took this Photoshop file, which had a ton of smart objects, and I exported it as a JPEG to run it through this next round of edits so that my
Okay.
file wasn't so laggy.
Really
I'd
good.
say that's the best thing you do. So like do it iteratively.
Yeah.
So go from one stage to the next. You do lose some of that like changeability. Like it's not as malleable once you've run it through all those exports. But that is a good way. And the other thing with smart objects is that they're a lot more friendly to non-destructive edits.
Yeah.
So instead of taking an eraser and erasing the part of the lighthouse that I don't want, I'm taking a mask and just basically hiding what I don't want.
Yeah, that way you don't have to worry about, oh wait, I kind of wanted that ocean back, let me bring it
Exactly,
back.
yeah. So I'd say that's why smart objects are, I mean, sometimes when I'm in a rush, I'll just say screw smart objects and go destructive.
Yeah, and then I feel like I always have to start over when I
Yeah,
do.
exactly. So
Yeah.
stick to smart objects if you can.
Yeah. Cool.
Alrighty. Well, do we have any last minute questions? All good. All right. Well, thanks again to Jake. That was an awesome presentation. I knew nothing about graphics and I learned a ton. Very nice.
Yeah, thank you guys for being such a good crowd.
All right. Well, we'll see you guys all later. Thanks so much for coming.